Have you ever wondered about the journey of a leader? What drives them? Motivates them? What pivotal moments help direct them on the road to success? Join us weekly for real conversations, empowering stories, and impactful insights that is sure to take you on an engaging adventure. Here, on the road with Yemi Akande-Bartsch. Today's podcast is brought to you by Jim Butler Auto Group, your local automotive powerhouse. Today, I'm picking up a passenger who's driving a different kind of transformation. He's doing it through storytelling, history, civic imagination, and pride. Join me on this ride with Dr. Jody Sowell, President and CEO of the Missouri Historical Society. We'll be exploring how understanding our past can illuminate the road ahead. Welcome to my show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Sorry it's a little bit rainy. But...
No, that's okay. I thought maybe you put in the rain order because rainy days are my sunny days. So what better time to shoot the podcast? But that said, let's start with how it all began. What attracted you to history and to this position?
Well, I don't know that I ever saw myself as being interested in history, or certainly not working for a history museum. I was actually a journalist, is how I got my start. I worked for the Dallas Morning News. I taught at the University of Missouri School of Journalism. I came here to St. Louis University to get my doctorate, and then really just fell in love with St. Louis. No place had ever felt like home the way St. Louis felt like home.
Right.
We knew this was the place we wanted to raise our girls. So it's actually a call from the History Museum to my Department of American Studies at St. Louis University saying, hey, do you know anyone who can do oral histories, these long-form interviews? And I had done some of that work in addition to my journalism work, and we knew it would slow down the doctorate, but we said, but maybe it'll get our foot in the door and keep us in St. Louis. And 19 years later, we're still here, and I'm still working there. So
that is amazing. I feel like that's the story of many people here in St. Louis. They weren't intending to stay here, and next thing you know, eternity later, they are still here and they are doing the good work that needs to be done. So what does it mean to you to run an institution such as the Missouri Historical Society?
Well, so I said I didn't necessarily think about being in history, capital H history,
yes.
But I was story always meant a lot to me. So whether I was a journalist or whether I was telling stories in front of a classroom full of college students, and really the Missouri Historical Society since 1866 has been protecting and preserving and sharing the St. Louis story. And so that's what I love about this work. We tell that story in any number of ways. We tell that story through our collections, we tell it through tours, we tell it through media. But what's so important to me is finding new ways to connect people more deeply to the St. Louis story.
And I have to say that you have done a fantastic work of that in terms of drawing people to the museum. I would venture to say that perhaps, could you talk a little bit about some of your most recent successful exhibits that has drawn people really from all over the world?
Yeah, so, in 2014 we started, that was the 250th anniversary of St. Louis, you might remember. And so we decided that year to put a lot more focus on telling St. Louis history. We'd always done that, but before we would oftentimes bring in traveling exhibits. And we said, no, we're going to put more of a focus on St. Louis history. When we did, that year, we saw a 63% increase in attendance.
Wow.
We saw 4 straight years of more than 400,000 in attendance. We saw much bigger attendance than museums in bigger cities like Chicago. So 2014, we welcomed 497,000. They welcomed 272,000. But you think about what a bigger market that is. And so over the years, over that 10-year span, we have done exhibits about architecture history and civil rights history and Route 66 history, which I think kind of shows you that's the real key, is showing that variety, telling those varieties of stories. I tell people what we're doing is, over the course of time, we're telling you a full St. Louis story.
Absolutely.
One year we might tell you about aviation history, and one year we might tell you about music history, and one year we might tell you about LGBTQ history.
Right.
But over time, we're telling you a complete story of this place that so many of us call home, or so many of us like to come and visit.
I love it.
But yeah, just in the last year, a little over a year ago, we opened a new World's Fair exhibit that has already been seen by more than 200,000 people.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That has earned St. Louis, and there's our Library and Research Center,
Yes.
one of the 3 institutions that the Historical Society runs. But that World's Fair exhibit has earned St. Louis the types of national and international headlines that we so desire, and
We
that
do.
other places would kill for. So that exhibit was covered by the New York Times, by PBS NewsHour, by Southern Living, but also by the Philippine Star, by the Philippine Times,
My
and by
gosh.
Italian Vanity Fair. So
Wow.
I don't know if any Italians came over because they saw it
Well,
in their copy of Vanity
never
Fair,
know.
but you never know.
But it's putting us on the map.
It absolutely is. And, that's one thing that I talk about a lot, is that's not just the Missouri Historical Society. That's the arts organizations throughout St. Louis. I just wrote a column about the fact that all of these institutions, you think about the Muni just winning a Tony.
Right.
You think about Lohmeyer's regularly on the list of best outdoor sculpture parks.
Yes,
you think about
indeed.
the fact that the Grand Center was said to be one of the best arts districts in the country. We are regularly getting these national and international headlines through our arts offerings. Yet, whenever business leaders and recruiters are going out there trying to get people to move to St. Louis, they are not talking about arts and culture enough.
Well, that's about to be changed with this interview.
There you go.
Because it's a call to action, and you don't really need to travel. You can if you so choose, but there's so much history here that tells the story of St. Louis, both the good, the bad, what we're challenged about, but it's also an opportunity for growth and to learn from our future or our past mistakes, so to speak. What are some of the most important and critical aspects of the history of St. Louis that people here should know?
Yeah. So rather than one thing like, oh, I wish they knew this era, or I wish they knew this place in our history, what I really wish, and what we're really striving for, is for St. Louisans just to understand how much fascinating stuff happened right here in the place that they call home. So, we tell people that, we have a presentation I think you have seen called I Am St. Louis and I Don't Believe We've Met.
Right.
And the sort of start of that is always, we tell people that most people outside of St. Louis, they only know one or two things. They know we have an arch. They know we have a baseball team named the Cardinals.
Right.
Sometimes they know about some headlines that we
Or
wish
the
they
soccer
didn't know
team.
about.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's true of people who have lived in St. Louis all their lives. I say all the time, St. Louis has forgotten who it is. And that's because we've forgotten our past. So
Why do you think that's so?
Well, I think it's true of a lot of places. I think in the St. Louis case, I think some of it is because of this narrative of decline that we have so bought into. I sometimes think it's because here in St. Louis, we know some things really well. So we know we had a World's Fair in 1904. But then it drops off a cliff as far as the rest of our knowledge.
Sure.
So in this I Am St. Louis presentation, we just say, if St. Louis could introduce itself, we tell you it's so much more fascinating and rich and diverse and complex than just the Cardinals or the Arch. And so we say if St. Louis could introduce itself, it would say, I'm the place that argued it should be the United States Capitol. I am the place where women could have gotten the vote 50 years earlier. I am the place that was having sit-ins 16 years before the sit-in movement supposedly started.
Right.
I am the place that launched men into space. I'm the place that rewrote the soundtrack of America countless times.
Wow.
And then we tell all of those stories. My favorite, the one about women getting the vote 50 years earlier, That's a story about Virginia Minor. October 15th, 1872, she walks up the steps of the old courthouse and says, "I'm here to register to vote." And they said, "Well, you can't vote. You're a woman." She said, "Of course I can. The 14th Amendment says if you're born in the United States, you have all the rights of citizenship. I was born in the United States. Surely voting is a right of citizenship."
Yep.
That case goes all the way from St. Louis to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court, spoiler alert, they sometimes get things wrong. They unanimously agreed that voting was not a right of citizenship. Take women 50 more years to get that right. But I tell people, Virginia Minor never thought she was going to get to vote.
Right.
She just knew if you were going to win the war for voting rights, it starts by fighting some unwinnable battles.
Absolutely.
And she was willing to lead that fight. But Yemi, when I talk to St. Louis audiences, after telling them that story, I always ask, how many of you have ever heard of Virginia Minor? And I will get one hand, two hands tops. This is a woman who should be a hero for every St. Louisan. This is someone whose shoulders we stand on. This is someone whose march toward voting rights would not have happened. And is courageous and bold and visionary. But yet we don't know her. And so if we haven't been introduced to these inspirational St. Louisans, we can never learn from the past.
That's true.
And I think about this with young people especially. I was talking to a group of high school students just last week, and I was telling them some of these I am stories, and then I said, "When do you learn about St. Louis history?" And they just looked at me blankly and they said, "Jody, we don't ever learn about St. Louis history in school."
Oh, it isn't.
But it is one of those ways that history can really come to life. I've seen it in my own teaching. I still sometimes teach at SLU. And when I have taught at SLU, especially when I was teaching post-World War II urban American history, and could say, you are standing on the grounds of Mill Creek Valley, one of the largest urban renewal efforts in the country's history. 20,000 African Americans displaced because this was labeled a slum, but what we lost was churches and businesses and neighborhoods. When I say you're standing on that ground, it brings history to life differently than if I said turn to chapter 7.
That's true.
and you see that with high school students. We saw that with the Civil Rights exhibit when they learned, oh, it's not just Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. It's people right here who are fighting for this.
Who were instrumental. You know, I've always thought that perhaps what could even, take things one step further is, I forget which Tennessee city I visited, and we were walking downtown, and all the different buildings, and even on grounds that you were walking, you could see a little placard that stated that such and such happened here, or this was the first building that something significant happened there. And I've often wondered whether those types of markers could help people.
They can. I think the markers oftentimes get overlooked, though. I'm glad that you were looking at them, but when I am in cities where they have a lot of markers, I see so many people just going right past them. So sometimes, we try to get to that through our tours program, like our CSTL tours.
And the tours are great, by the way. Yes.
Where we take people into the neighborhoods or by the buildings and tell them this history. You think of, on that I Am St. Louis, we have one that says, I'm the place that taught America what a skyscraper should look like. And that's about the Wainwright Building, because when the Wainwright Building opened in 1891, not the country's first skyscraper, but truly the model for everyone that came after. Frank Lloyd Wright says that. PBS names it one of the 10 buildings that changed America. But think of how many St. Louisans on their way to a Cardinals game just walk right past that, not knowing how important it is in architecture history, but American history. So, so we try to grab people by the hand and tell them those stories through tours, through presentations, of course, through exhibits. Even our exhibit for kids 10 and younger, the History Clubhouse, just celebrated, I think today is its 10th birthday.
Wow, time flies.
It does.
Yeah.
But in there's a little Wainwright Building where kids can build the final wall of the Wainwright Building. They think it's fun to stack the bricks.
Yeah.
We're actually trying to teach them a little St. Louis history along the way. Sneak it in.
So this city is a living, breathing museum.
Absolutely.
And we need to do more for, the citizens of this region to know more about it, to appreciate it, to learn about it, to share, and to be inspired.
Absolutely. And, I think people are hungry for those stories. Sometimes I think, and this is not I'm a teacher and I talk to teachers a lot, but unfortunately the way that history has been taught over the years, and I think this is changing, but when you and I were in school, it was a lot of dates and facts I was supposed to remember, and it wasn't much about the stories that bring history to life. And so I always tell people my favorite visitor is the visitor who says, I hate history. Because I can say, no, you don't. It's just been presented wrong. Let me tell you some great stories. And I think St. Louisans especially are hungry for these stories of inspirational people, inspirational moments, and they're not looking for you to sugarcoat things. I mean, when we talked about Virginia Minor, that was a time when women didn't have the right to vote. But there are always heroes in those chapters, too.
Absolutely.
Or, Pearl Maddox was one of the people leading those lunch counter sit-ins in 1944. There are people who are fighting for what is right, who are working to make the world a better place in every chapter of St. Louis history.
That is so true. So what is one untold St. Louis history besides Virginia Minor that you shared that you think, if only more people knew about this?
Well, one that I like to talk about a lot is and we don't have the pictures with us, but November 28th, 1939, St. Louis in the middle of the day, it looked like it was the middle of the night. And if you go and look, and you can find them at mohistory.org, look at some of these old photos of what it looked like that day. It has since been called Black Tuesday. You can barely see the top of the Civil Courts building. The sun looks like the moon. Cars and streetcars have their lights on because it is pitch black in the middle of the day. Because at the time we were burning soft coal because it was cheap and easy to get, but it's basically like burning asphalt, and all the smoke is just blocking up the city. It was so bad that the Botanical Gardens thought that it might have to move because it didn't know that it was going to be able to stay in this polluted city. Well, Black Tuesday was the worst, but there were certainly other days like this. But it caused St. Louis to get serious about coal smoke. And St. Louis passed a smoke ordinance. 7 years later, St. Louis had reduced coal smoke by 75%.
Wow,
and had
that's
become
significant.
A model for cities across the country. Pittsburgh, where my oldest daughter, went to undergrad, was famously called hell with the lid ripped off because of all the smoke that was coming from the factories. Well, when Pittsburgh decided it needed to clean its skies, it looked to St. Louis and its smoke ordinance for a model for how they would do it.
Wow.
What I tell audiences today, because you asked, what else would I like audiences to know? What I tell St. Louis audiences today is, I know we face a lot of big problems, and big challenges, and big issues, and sometimes those can feel insurmountable.
Right.
We can't possibly figure out how to fix crime or city-county divide or population loss, whatever the case may be. Then I tell them, those people literally blacked out the sun, and they figured out a way to fix it.
True.
History teaches us that. History teaches us those lessons. We talked about the downtown lunch counter sit-ins. I was lucky enough to do an oral history with a woman who, Jessie McMillan, a woman who had been involved in those sit-ins in 1944. And she went down, and there were a group of white women sitting at the lunch counter.
Right.
And Jessie and her couple of friends go up to them and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, they don't serve blacks here." And Jessie said, "I know, that's what we're here to protest." So the white women all ordered a plate of food and then got up and let the black women sit down and eat it as a form of protest.
Wow.
Those types of, here's how we came together, here's how we worked across racial divides, across economic divides, to work together to solve these issues, to fight for justice. Those are in every chapter.
Wow, those are very important. This show is brought to you by Jim Butler Auto Group, your local automotive powerhouse. And as you were sharing a lot of these stories, what I was thinking next is, what does the history of St. Louis teach us about leadership?
That's a very good question. I think there are various people you can point to, and we've talked about a couple. We've certainly talked about Virginia Minor and Pearl Maddox. Those are examples of leadership where you are fighting against what seem like insurmountable odds, but not going to let it stop you.
Right.
I think of someone like James Eads, who had never built a bridge before, never designed a bridge before, but knew that he could do it.
Right.
That bridge, the Eads Bridge, which just celebrated its 150th birthday last year, is now the oldest bridge on the Mississippi.
Really?
So that kind of stick-to-itiveness, that kind of boldness, that kind of belief in yourself, those people are, again, in every chapter of St. Louis history. We just need someone to introduce us to them.
And that's why you're here.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, you're
think
doing
about James McDonnell and McDonnell Aircraft, and the fact that 1965 is the first time that 2 manned space capsules rendezvoused in space, both of them made right here in St. Louis. So I think that is certainly, whatever characteristic of leadership you are looking for, you can find in a St. Louisan who walked on these very streets that you did. We have a new exhibit, fairly new, called Collected, and it basically lets individual artifacts stand on their own and tell their own story. The biggest complaint that museums get is, you have this great collection, but we don't get to see most of it. And the problem is, if I have an exhibit about music history, an exhibit about architecture history, and you don't speak to either one of those, you're not coming out. So what Collected allows us to do is just get more of our collection out. But one of the first things you'll see is Nobel Prize given to William Knowles. William Knowles was a St. Louis scientist who came up with a equation, a formula that was used for medicine that helped fight tremors for people who had Parkinson's.
Wow.
And when he was going to go and pick up the medal and be part of the ceremony in Sweden, they told him, before you come over, you need to sign a lot of business cards, because when you get here, so many people are going to ask you for your autograph that it's going to be too hard for you to sign them then. You're just going to have to hand these out like crazy. But he could walk down the streets of St. Louis and no one would know who he was.
Wow.
And so that's the other thing, is that there are St. Louisans today that are making huge impacts. We might not necessarily know them.
That is so true. That's why we need to get out more and get out to the museum to come and learn these historical lessons, because it also teaches us significantly about leadership. What's possible when the people have willpower, although they may not necessarily have the education or the experience, but they know they can do it.
Exactly.
And they do it.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about, bridging divides. In what way do you see the Historical Society Museum helping bridge divides?
Yeah. I think we are committed, and we talk about so often, that we want to tell the story of all St. Louisans, and that everyone is part of St. Louis history, and that everyone deserves to have their history told. And I think it's one of those ways where you can make connections, and maybe even connections that you didn't know were possible, or maybe you live in one area and you are not around many people who look different than you. Coming and learning their stories, learning about these inspirational people of all different races and backgrounds and ages, I think that's where you can start to build those connections and those common understandings, and starting to realize that we all have much more in common than we do things that set us apart.
True.
I'm also incredibly proud of just the fact that The History Museum, Soldiers Memorial, the Library and Research Center were these places where people can come and just share the same physical space. And, my background is in urban history, and we talk a lot about even this sidewalk, how important this sidewalk is, because I can walk down that sidewalk and someone who looks completely different from me can be coming the other way, and we pass each other and we say hello, and then we move on. But that is so important because it teaches us not to be afraid of one another, not to be scared of the stranger, to know that we are all part of the same human family. And, I think of something like our concert series. We have this Twilight Thursday concert series in the spring and fall, where we have music every week outside on the front lawn. The Margaret and Edward Emo Family Plaza now. Thank you to the Emos. So, but those nights, they generally draw 4,000, 5,000 people of all different races and ages and backgrounds. Some who've lived in St. Louis all their lives and some who just moved here. But they're just sharing the same space. And
they're doing it through music.
Exactly.
And that's awesome.
And so sometimes I've had my staff say, well, we gotta work on getting those people into the museum. We want them to see the exhibits, and isn't it a shame that they're just sitting out there listening to the music?
They'll come back.
No, that's its own value. Just
right.
having a space where people feel comfortable to get together, especially in a world where those spaces seem to be becoming more rare, and we seem to be enclosed in our own spaces or on our phones in that space. These opportunities to create experiences where people can come together are incredibly important. Again, that's not capital H history. Listening to a cover band play Tina Turner songs is not necessarily capital H history.
But I love it.
But it's incredibly important.
Absolutely.
And we've also had people say that they didn't know that Tina Turner lived in St. Louis, and so we got to fix that too.
Yes, we do. One of the things that I'm a foodie. So if you ever consider doing an event where you ask people, perhaps it's part of your immigrant exhibit, you set a dinner table and ask us to bring in food from all over.
Yes, it's a great idea.
I'm so there.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. So sorry about giving you ideas.
You can be our guest curator for the food exhibit.
I would even do that. Okay. I've always wanted to do something like that. When I was a college professor, I would encourage my students to go out and experience, a different, spiritual worship, church, what have you. And on one day, a group of my students, they called me on a Sunday and they said, Dr. Akande, we want to go to this church, which was closer to my house. We wondered if you would accompany us. And I thought, this is your assignment, not my assignment, because right now I'm really enjoying my worship at Bedside Baptist Church. So I got up from bed that morning and ended up meeting my students at one of the churches that I had selected. Well, we were walking in and I thought, why, this is such a busy church today. What is going on? So we sat in the balcony, was going through the service, and then halfway through the service, they said, and our special guest today is none other than Oprah Winfrey.
Oh.
I just went, oh my God, you get a car, you get a car. We all get a car. But it was such a profound experience for my students to be there. And there's something enriching about just being in a space where you have different people, just communing together. So no, I am so there.
Well,
so I would say yes.
Yeah, I tell students that all the time because students are oftentimes, college students are oftentimes moving to different places because, there's a job here and then they're going to go here and they're trying to move up. And I always tell them, I know you think you either love a place or you don't.
Right.
But all the research shows that's not true, that you can learn to fall in love with a place.
Yes, you
But
can.
the way you do that is you go out and explore, you go to different churches, you go to local farmers markets, you go to the local theater, you start to involve yourself in a community. Part of that is also about learning the community's history.
Absolutely.
And if you do that, you will in fact fall in love with those places, even if later you have to move. It's one thing I think about a lot with especially Wash U and SLU students who are oftentimes coming from different places, if we could convert just 5% of those people, those students to stay in St. Louis, that would be a game changer.
Absolutely.
And that is all about business and business leadership. So one thing we do is we regularly do tours for those students of St. Louis. I have spoken at family weekend to make sure that the parents know about how great St. Louis is. So, doing that work to get those students more connected to St. Louis is valuable and could be incredibly important for our future.
Absolutely. So, one of the ways in which I start to close out my interview is through my rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So, are you ready?
I don't know what being ready is, but yes, I think
ready
I am.
as you'll ever be.
Right.
So let us dive in. What inspiring book is on your book stand right now, or your nightstand, that you're reading or you've read?
Oh, my nightstand is just filled with books, and they're not all being read, which makes me feel bad.
You mean it's not on your phone?
No.
Okay.
I am reading, but I'm not going to remember the title book right now about the history of school integration in Detroit, which I think does have some fascinating lessons to be taught. I will say on my nightstand right now is one of my favorite books, and that is A River Runs Through It. And I don't know if necessarily it has an amazing, actually it does have some great leadership lessons.
Okay.
And also just some lessons about appreciating place.
Okay. So what is a historical figure that you would like to have coffee, lunch, or dinner, or can be invited to the curated dinner at the museum? Yeah.
Well, a lot of those people that we've already talked about, but also Logan Uriah Rivas. Logan Uriah Rivas in the 1860s wrote a book called The Future Great City of the World, talking about St. Louis. He was the one who really pushed for the United States Capitol to be moved to St. Louis. I would like to talk to him, kind of have a boosterism off, like who's more passionate about St. Louis, him or me. But I would also like to point out, does he really still think St. Louis should be the capital of the United States? Do you see some of the stuff that happens in D.C.?
It could happen, yes.
So it would be an interesting conversation.
Okay. What is, besides St. Louis, a city that has so much history in it that you think everyone should visit based on your visit?
Well, first of all, every city has a fascinating history. You just got to go out and find it. I would say probably two of my favorites are Detroit and Pittsburgh.
Okay. How come?
I like urban
areas.
To both,
yes.
I think,
and you're an urban historian.
Yeah, and I like sort of Midwest industrial cities, but I think both also have great museums. So
true, very true indeed. Best advice you've ever gotten?
I don't know if it's really necessarily...
Or maybe it's the worst advice you ever got and didn't take.
No. I don't know if it's necessarily advice, but Kipling said that if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. And I think about that a lot, about the fact that I just want people to know their own history and to feel it and to be inspired by it. And his reminder that the way to do that is tell a good story, that sticks with me all the time.
You tell a good story, and it sticks with many people all the time, and many that we are even yet to meet. I'm curious that if you could wave a magic wand, what would you change about St. Louis, or what would you add to it?
Well, I would add to it a lot more people. I think I worry a lot. Many leaders around St. Louis worry. I know you've had some forums recently on population. Think about some of the amazing work being done by Ness Sandoval at SLU, really showing that we really have some challenges ahead. And so finding ways to attract people here, I think a lot of it is about telling the St. Louis story better. I talked to a recruiter for a major business in St. Louis who, when I talked to her about the fact that the arts is one reason that we stayed, because we could raise our girls in the arts in an affordable way that we could just not do in just about any other American city.
Right.
She told me, I never thought about telling people about the arts in St. Louis.
Wow.
I just tell them we have good sports and it's easy to get around.
But it's much more than that.
I said, you probably have more free museums per capita of any city outside of DC than any city in the country, and you didn't think to mention that? I think about all the opportunities that go missed when we don't tell people just how amazing this place is. And that's not just about the arts, that's about the park that we're going by right now. And I know Forest Park looks a lot different and was hit incredibly hard by the tornado. But the fact that this place that, yes, is bigger than Central Park, is such a defining feature of this community that regularly gets voted the best urban park in America. I mean, this is the type of place that you can bring people from out of town and get them to fall in love with St. Louis. But I don't know that we're always seizing on those opportunities. So if I could wave a magic wand, more people. It actually doesn't take a magic wand. What it takes is us telling a better story of St. Louis.
And I think it starts right here. Describe St. Louis in 3 words.
That one's hard. When people ask me to do that, I often say proud, dispirited, and contradictory. Because I think we are proud, but I think oftentimes we're our own worst critics. We're the ones telling the worst story. And to me, that contradiction is fascinating.
Think it's workable?
Absolutely. So I said earlier that the one thing that people know about St. Louisans know about St. Louis is that we had a World's Fair in 1904. But on opening day of that World's Fair, David Francis said something along the lines, I'll mess up the quote, but something along the lines of that he hoped that we would learn the lessons that were gathered here at this 1904 World's Fair and would use it as inspiration for still greater accomplishments ahead. The problem with the way that St. Louisans have too often told the story is that we were once great and then that there was this huge decline. That's not what they wanted you to do with history. What they wanted you to do with history is use people like Virginia Minor and James Eads and Logan Uriah Rivas in moments like when we had those downtown lunch counter sit-ins or sent men into space, and use those as inspiration for still greater accomplishments ahead. That's what we have to do with St. Louis history.
And I couldn't agree more. I believe that greater is ahead with the history of our region and also for our region. And I am just so grateful for the work that you do here and the stories that you tell. They are compelling. I could listen to you all day long.
Well, let's take another loop.
Okay, yes. But this is great. This is great.
I appreciate you navigating us through today, but also all the ways that you navigate the business community through these leadership challenges that we face, and to think more deeply about leadership. So
it's doable. I think your brand should actually become how we sell St. Louis, because we are all St. Louis. A number of the guests that I've interviewed on the podcast thus far aren't necessarily from St. Louis, but this is our adopted city. Absolutely. And we love it dearly, and we want the larger community and the world to love it as much as we do.
Absolutely, that's the goal.
Yes, and we're doing it.
This helps.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks again to Dr. Jody Sowell for the work that he's doing at the Missouri Historical Society. If you haven't had a chance to visit, I say come on, run on down, and come and listen to the amazing musicians. I don't know where you find them, but I've tried to drive through here thinking maybe I could get parking up close. I don't know what I was thinking, so just Uber here most of the time. But it's an amazing museum, and we're glad that you continue to call St. Louis home. So thanks again for being on my podcast.
Thank you. Great driving today, and thanks for all the ways that you drive St. Louis.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. What a ride. Huge thanks to Dr. Jody Sowell for joining me and reminding us that the stories we tell and preserve shape who we become as an individual and also as a region. On the Road with Yemi Akande-Bartsch is made possible by our friends at Jim Butler Auto Group, your local automotive powerhouse. Be sure to follow and subscribe on YouTube so you never miss a moment of insight, laughter, or real talk from leaders across the nation. Until next time, keep driving forward with curiosity, courage, and a deep respect for the road behind and the one ahead. This show is brought to you by Jim Butler Auto Group, your local automotive powerhouse.